And I am glad to introduce our next speaker, Rik Bos. He is a senior game designer / analyst at Next Games Finland. And he will tell us about designing a game using analytics. Am I right?
Yes. Thank you. Yes, does it work? Perfect. Yes. So I want to tell a little bit about how we at Next Games are designing for our live games, and especially how we use analytics for that. And for us, that has been a little bit of a process, because we launched our first game, and afterwards it's been a lot of learning on how to actually set this up. And I would like to get you through all those learnings, and then give a case study of how we actually did one of our researches, and how that got to redesigning one of our most important game modes in The Walking Dead. So first, me, as said, I'm a game designer gone analyst, and I use my God mode at Next Games. And Next Games is a company, when I started, around about 10 people, and right now we launched some games, and we grew our studio in the past years to 93 people, with 14 nationalities, and around about 16 million downloads and counting, of course. We're headquarters in Helsinki. I'm not from Helsinki, I'm from the Netherlands. And what we do is that we want to translate the world's biggest IPs, entertainment IPs, we want to translate those to mobile games, so that fans and friends can share these experiences, relive these experiences and more on their phones. And as you see, we've worked on our title that we have live now, The Walking Dead No Man's Land, which is the official game for AMC's TV show, The Walking Dead. And this is something that we have upcoming. Blade Runner, the re-release that's coming out, I think this year or next year. But my story began in 2014, and I don't know if we have many people who moved to Finland in the room, but for a lot it started the same way. I fell in love with a Finnish girl and decided to leave my home country and move to Finland. So there I was. It took a little bit getting used to, but after a while, and because I joined Next Games, it actually felt really familiar, and now I really love living in Finland. But 2014 is not the only thing that happened. This is not the only thing that happened that year. It was also a year for a great opportunity for us at Next Games, because around this time, we got the chance to work on this brand, The Walking Dead. And The Walking Dead, just to show how big this chance was, is the #1 TV show in the US. It has, in the US alone, like 20 million viewers for one episode. And not that alone, but it's also a great brand to make a game of. It's like a really harsh world where people try to survive and try to stay human in a world that is not human anymore. With great story arcs and great character development. So I got to be the designer of this game. So in 2014, we started with a small team to work on this game. And in 2015, we finally got to something that we could feel that we, first of all, liked to play, but also we could be proud of. And I want to quickly show what we ended up with, in 2015. So that's the game that we launched in 2015. And what you do in this game is that you have to survive in the world of The Walking Dead. You do that by collecting, finding survivors, but also collecting your favorite heroes from the TV show. You have to train them, and that way fight off hordes of walkers. And the thing that makes this game unique is that we brought turn-based combat, so XCOM-like combat, to mobile in a fast-paced form that's easy to play and fits the genre and fits the devices of short sessions, quick gameplay, but still deep gameplay. So now we've developed this game for 1.5 years, and then we launch it. So while developing, we've basically been living in a bit of a bubble. So with very little contact with the outside world. We have some methods that we can use. We can use playtesting. That way we can find out a little bit about how players might react to our game. But with launch, that all changed. So the main difference here is that we got players in our game. And with players, we got a lot of information. And this information needs us to develop a little. Basically, the bubble was broken, and we need to develop our game a little bit different. So we get information from community, people writing, giving feedback. We can talk back, learn what they think. There's player support, finding out about problems in the game, and we have data. And my interest went to the data. Basically, what we can do is we can measure from everybody in very, very big detail, or to very small detail, we can measure what people are doing. And for me, that was very interesting, because I thought we can make our games better with that. So I put my glasses on. I really bought them that year. And I became a game analyst, and with a mission. So what I wanted to do was learn and understand how players interact with our game. And with that, my intention was to support our team. So everybody who is making our game, support them into bringing a better game experience to our players. But also, of course, making more impact on our business. The big question was, how do we do this? Basically, we hadn't done this on this scale before. So for me and my team, we went on a journey to figure out what to do. We have lots of lessons learned, but basically all the lessons can be grouped into 3 different categories. So we have tech, culture, and process. I won't talk much about tech today, but basically the important part there is that you have a very, very good setup where the quality of data is really strong, and you have the ability to give answers to questions very quick. With that, you'll make your life a lot easier. But the culture and process, I want to go in a little deeper. So culture is, we now have all of this information. How do we make sure that we as a team make the most use of that? How do we change our ways of thinking from we know everything, or we need to make assumptions everywhere, to we can answer questions? And the process, we have a lot of data out there. How do we use this at different stages in especially the design process to make better choices? For the culture, what is central is curiosity. So what we needed to shift mindsets to asking questions, and a lot of them. So one example I like to give, what this means is to go from assumptions, like me as background in design, when I design something, I make a whole load of assumptions. Some are very big and fundamental, and some are very small. But the assumptions are mostly about player behavior. How will someone react to something that I design? or how does someone play with what we have created? And that we can now turn around, and especially the most fundamental assumptions that you make, we can now turn into questions, and with that, improve the quality of our designs. The second point is that we can now, when we iterate, we can start learning. So we can measure what we have done and learn from that. And that also requires a mindset. It requires very open attitude in the team. So how we did that, or some things that helped us doing that, was that we basically at Next Games, we give everyone access to the data. If someone wants and is capable to, because it's actually quite hard to search for data, not everybody is able to do that, they can have access to the lowest level of data that we have. But most members of our team like to have it already a little bit distilled, so they have access to a dashboard environment, which is more easy to interpret, and where we can help interpret them quite easily. The other part, which I think is very important, is that an analyst is always in the team. An analyst is there to listen while discussions are going on, especially design or UX or UI discussions are going on, and turn the assumptions that are made there into questions right away. But also just to be available for questions. And at some point in our team, this actually worked pretty well. So we got so many questions that I started to feel a little bit like this. So it needs to be a balance. You can't answer everything with questions. It's important to also to pick out the most important questions and go from there. Also, keep trusting yourself, keep trusting your creativity and your assumptions. Just the most fundamental one. The second one is process. So here I have a very simplified design process of ideating, concept, develop, and evaluation. And while we were in our bubble, so in production, without our game live, basically the main way of testing these ideas, or the main ways of going through this cycle, was for the designers to rely on their own strengths. So on their creativity, on their experience. And we implemented the playtesting in the evaluation step to kind of give some kind of feedback loop at this point. But now that we have data, we can make this process a lot smarter. We can have way more kind of feedback points within this process. And give some examples. I'll show in what phase we used what kind of, how we use data in what phase of this process. So the ideation phase, where we're trying to figure out what could we do next, what possibilities are out there. Here, the main thing that we can do is we can research. So we have an idea that something might be wrong, so we can identify problems. We can, our designers have an idea of where there might some space for improvement. We can look into that, dive deep, and find those problems, so directly contribute. But also we can support our designers to focus. So we have the performance of our product, of our game, and we can think about like how, where we need the most improvement, so that our designers can think, this is where we want to focus on our ideas on. The second one is the concept. So we've chosen our main ideas, the ideas we want to focus on, and we make different concepts for this. And here we can do two things. So this is the point where the verification of assumptions becomes very important, but also when all the designs are ready, we know who a feature is going to target. We know how it tries to do that. We can go deeper into the behavior and think about the impact that the feature will have. With development, we go in more detail. So here we think about what kind of behavior, or the design questions that we have here is more, they are more pointed towards the small level. We want to balance a feature. We want to figure out the small kind of details about the design that make it work. So from data research, here we are also interested in the small behavior that players do with our game that makes it work for them. So that's focus. When the development team goes in detail, we go in detail. And the last step is when either when we test concept features or when we launch them, we can measure impact and we can learn with our team. So we close the feedback loop. With all that, I want to go to a case study. So I want to show how we actually put this in practice in one example. So it won't tell the whole thing, but I think it will be an interesting case. So this is the case how we got to redesign our most important game mode. So to know how this goes, I want to introduce the game modes to you first. So we have 4 different game modes in our game, or at the time of the study. This study was done in 2016. The most important was the first one is the story mission. That's a linear progress with beautifully crafted, tailor-made missions that we guide the players into our game and keep them going for as long as the game lasts as well. Then there's scavenge missions. These are missions that you can play quick and you can grind for resources. So you can progress in the metagame with this. Basically, it's a support type of mission that you can use to make your team stronger and engage in all the other game modes. The outposts, that's our PvP content where you can challenge other players. And then the last is the challenge mode. And this is a weekly returning mode where you can play together with your friends and take your team and to a series of missions that keep getting harder and harder and harder until you can't beat them anymore. And the challenge mode, that's the heartbeat of our game. So what you see here is basically the engagement of our players. And all the peaks is when we activate the challenge mode. So this really is the most important mode in our game. And we decided to redesign and change this one rigorously. So that means that we also, at the moment, are going to take like a huge risk. Because if we screw this one up, we risk like sinking our whole game or ruining our whole game for all the players we have. Still, we did it. It didn't come from nowhere. We, at this point, already knew that for our higher-end players, they had some kind of problems there. They found that the rewards that they were getting in the beginning of the challenge, when the missions were very easy, were not so rewarding. But still, the risk was really big. But the research we did made us believe, me and the team, that we can do it better. So we changed it. And that research started with a very simple question. Can we identify different player types in our game? So you can go very, very big here. We were thinking about what are motivations behind playing. We were thinking about, can we do it in spending patterns? But we wanted to first do this simple, so we made it a little bit different. Can we identify people who prefer one game mode only? And how we did that was by clustering. So we took a snapshot of a week of data, and we basically asked ourselves, what missions did one player play? Or what missions did all players play this week of different game modes? And with this, we identified different player types. And surprisingly enough, or not so surprising, there are people who really prefer one type over another. So you see that in these 3 middle player types. The last one, those are super fanatical players who like both the challenges and PvP together. And the first one are players who are passive, who have low engagement, who don't prefer any of the game modes that we have. So now that we have identified this, we can also see how many are there. And what we found is that we had, at this point, we had a little bit, to my liking at least, too many passive players and too many scavengers in our game. While the amount of story challengers and the PvP players were relatively low. Now, this was for us not so nice, because if you look at the engagement, you can see that these groups, where we have not so many of, are highly engaged, while the groups that we have a lot of are not so engaged. And this is also related to the amount of money that they spend. So basically, engagement is completely related to the amount of money spent in a game, at least in our game. So we searched, where are these players at in our game? So what level are they at? And we found that the passive and grinders could be anywhere in the game. So wherever they might be, the highest level of play, the lowest level of play, they could fit to a slightly less active or a scavenger group. While the story players, they were very early in the game, and the challengers were the late game players mainly. So with this, we asked, hey, what can we do with this? So to know that a little bit more, like, we want, of course, to have more players in the more active groups. So we asked ourselves the question, like, how do players then move between groups? And one type of player was very interesting here. So this was the story player. Because the story player, basically, it's an early game player that had proven to love our game. And what we found when looking into this was that someone who was highly engaged with our game, early in our game, still most of those players either became passive or churned out. And that's something that that's something that we wouldn't like, because it means that the player that proved to love our game does not love it anymore. So we wanted to get these story players to transition to challengers instead. Basically allowing more players to love our game. So at this point, I presented all this to our team, all these findings, and we went into working together to figure out how can we make this happen? How can we get transition to story mode? And we asked ourselves, asked our designers and our UX people, how could it be that players don't get into the challenge mode? One of the findings here was that the story mode, when you get into the game, the story mode, the progression in that system, slowed down very heavily. So the difficulty rises steadily, but our metagame progression rises or slows down really fast, meaning that a player can, at the beginning of the game, play maybe 25 missions a week without paying, and later in the game they can maybe play 1 mission a week of the story mode. At the same time that this happens, there is very alternative content, or there was very little alternative content for our players. So that meant that players who loved our story mode had to resolve to scavenge missions. The challenge missions at that point were unlocked, but slightly too difficult. And because they were difficult, also a little unrewarding. So this was the key thing that we needed to fix. And while we needed to fix that, we also still needed to make sure that this remained the heartbeat of our game. So for the old players, all the changes that we did needed to make the game better, the game mode better for them rather than worse. That was the task for our designers at that point. And they did a pretty great job doing that. And we went into development with this. So at this point, Our designers were working on the designs. I was giving them information on how do players currently play the challenge mission. And in the end, we came up with Challenge 2.0. So what we did was we put a dynamic difficulty system in. So where before all players would have the same difficulty track, starting from level 1 to level 100. Now, early players will start with the early levels and gradually go up for a path that's suitable for them. And old game players, or the high-level players, will start at a higher difficulty level and get rewards that are good for them and slowly progress. And this paid off. So basically, with this, we could implement relevant rewards for every player. And we could set, with this, also clear goals and clear carrots for players to chase after. The effect of this was that we saw a big rise in amount of challengers. So the first effect was we saw the groups in our game from that were passive and scavengers. A lot of them flowed into the challengers bucket. But there's also a longer term effect that our story players, now every new player that we get in, more of them will get to enjoy our challenge mode. So basically, it's a better game experience for the new players that we get into our game. This was one example. I hope you enjoyed it. We are still working every day to improve these topics. It's an ongoing process, and we're not at all at the point where we think we have the best way, and I think we'll never be finding it. But at least we're very happy that we can drive these things forward.
Thank you, Rik. And please, your questions.
Thank you for the speak. Actually, I have a question about data. So, do you have and how you fight it impact from the series? So, let's say the new series came out, and if, of course, you have a increase of engagement, increase of player. Do you make some assumption about this, or correct data or correct analysis?
I have to think a bit how to answer this. Of course, there's an impact on the series. That's the main thing why we actually work with the brands. So, and we do have an expectation on what's going to happen when the series go live. It changes numbers for sure. We are working on things that we can have a better prediction on what is going to happen, but we are not there yet. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Your questions are still welcome.
Thank you for the talk. Great stuff. After you implement all the changes, did you remeasure the engagement? Because basically what you've done, you've pushed more people through the funnel. And by reducing basically offering higher endish content earlier by making it less higher endish.
Yeah.
And basically you say that the segment improved, but did you recheck the engagement? How the engagement changed? Because it must have changed as well, the engagement level of that segment.
Yes, it did. That's a very good question because it's not a one-on-one relation. So what you said is completely right. We put a game mode that was for late game a little bit forward, and with that, because there was a gap between the two game modes, by pushing it forward and making it better for the early players, we allowed them to engage with the game mode already at an earlier level. And because the challenge game mode is more meaningful to players than the game modes, than for example the scavenge game mode, that resulted in the end in a higher level of engagement in general, but not a one-on-one relation. So if you see the amount of challengers grow, which is natural because it's more accessible now, it won't give like one-on-one engagement increase right away.
Did the blue spikes go up higher after you did this change? The audience graph?
Higher and earlier.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi, thanks for the speech. I have a question not about your speech, but about the game. I'm wondering, why did production company of decided did choose you over other mobile games company if your company had no games in portfolio before that? And so how did you get this game?
We had one game in production at the time, but I guess that it's mostly like the founders of our company who had many years of experience. So it's believe in people more than believe in what have you done before with the group of people. I don't know. I'm not AMC, so I can't give the full answer.
Okay,
but that's my best guess.
Do you want to ask anything more?
Hello, thanks for the speech. Maybe you can give some advices for people who have just started in analytics. So maybe what are the metrics that are worth looking into, or what is, the data that worth looking into?
Yeah, what phase of a game?
When the game has just released and it needs some analysis, it already has data, but it needs some analysis of that data.
Yeah. In that case, I would say get the KPIs out first. So that means retention, monetization, etc. Compare them to other games. Find out where your strong points are, weak points are. And when you know what you kind of want to improve, look into those. So say retention is your weak point, look into the tutorial funnel, look into anything in your game that could affect retention. And if it's just out, run a lot of A/B tests. But actually better if it's not out yet, if it's in soft launch, run A/B tests where you change things very big. So what you're interested in at that point is to find, if I change this balance things or this feature, will I see a movement up in metrics or down in metrics? So you're interested in the direction of how does what influence what? Because what you're after at this point is trying to get like the main metrics to move by quite big steps.
Okay, and if the game is not in soft launch but already is out there, so maybe a lot of A/B tests will be not very good for the game just because it may drive users off. So what would you recommend then?
Yeah, depends on the, like A/B testing is still an option. You just have to be a little bit more careful, or I don't like this, but not care about your audience. I don't like this at all. Otherwise, like where to start is very often still with either UX testing or designers, or you have like to get like an idea of where to start searching. So there's always a starting point needed. So if the retention's showing low, then my first reaction would be check all the basics, tutorial funnel. Are there any points in your game, in your progression curve, where there's all of a sudden like a very big drop in retention? Those kind of things. And from UX, a similar thing. Do a study on the start of your game find out things how you can improve your retention whatever way you can, and then work on those.
Okay, thank you.
We still have time.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. And which tools did you use for promotion your game, maybe social media or something like that?
I think I'm the wrong person to ask that question.
Okay.
Okay, then you're probably the right person to ask which tools you used for analytics.
Yes, that I can answer. We started off with a tool that we were not so happy about, won't name names, but afterwards we switched to Google BigQuery and their data platform, and that's been absolutely amazing. So the idea there is that it's a service, and our whole company runs without one server on site. So we have everything as external services in the cloud. That makes it easy to scale up when we need to. So our games run on Microsoft Azure, and our data platform runs on Google BigQuery.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Rik, for your talk. Thank you for the questions. And as usual, you're all welcome to talk to Rik.
Thank you.
So we keep catching our speakers in the hallway and putting cameras in front of them. Hi, please introduce yourself.
My name is Samuel Ranteskla. I work for Microsoft as a principal program manager out of Sweden.
Okay, Samuel, so let's talk about games. What's your favorite game?
Well, I wish I played a lot more games than I actually do. So I have to go back into the past. Like, one of my really favorite games is Jag the Lions 2 from like 92, 93. I think it was made here in Russia, if I'm not mistaken. Civilization, always been a big fan of that. And then the Enemy Unknown UFO trilogy from the 90s. There's so many games, I mean, it's like impossible to select one. But they're all strategic games, the ones that are my favorite.
Yeah, you're obviously a tactician. That's commendable. But do you remember the very first game you've ever played?
Decathlon, probably on the X86, somewhere around 84.
Wow, that's I don't even remember that one.
Oh, it's like you basically play decathlon and you just hammer at the keyboard to go faster, like 10 different sports events. Played it like crazy. I was 8 years old then.
Wow. How did you get into the gaming industry?
It was by chance, actually. So I was studying at Uppsala University, doing computer science, and they had this fair where companies were meeting the students. And there was these two guys that they've started a game company in the basement, and they wanted somebody to write a BSP tree, binary space partitioning tree. And I was looking for my thesis, so I figured let's combine those. So I joined them, I wrote my thesis in the games industry, and then from there on kind of like just went on. So this was 2000.
But now in 2017, what's your favorite and least favorite thing about game dev?
I mean, I think the games industry is awesome. Great place to work. There's so much passion. There's skilled, very intelligent people. I think that's my favorite thing. The least favorite thing is that, which I covered in my speech a little bit, I think that we're looking a little bit too much at how do we turn time into money, rather than seeing like how do we educate our kids. I really want to, that's my passion myself, is like take this experience, make our kids better tomorrow than they are today. I'm a parent as well, so that's coming from that.
Well, that's a very noble thing to do.
I don't know if noble, just I think it would be a good thing for us.
Definitely is. About your speech, did you have any interesting questions that maybe stood out?
Yeah, there was some interesting questions, like if we look at mixed reality, what's going to happen with that? What's the dangers with that? I couldn't really answer them because let's see what happens.
But if you were a part of your own audience, what question would you like to ask yourself?
That was a tricky one. Are you sure that you're right?
Are you?
No.
Well, we can be sure 100%, but still, we're trying to foresee the future here. How do you like the conference?
Love it. St. Petersburg, great place, wargaming, excellent hosts. It's a great place to be. You should come to the next one.
Definitely do. Say, if you had the chance to go back in time to when you just started working in the industry and give yourself one advice, what would it be?
Try one of your ideas out.
That's very good. Thank you very much, Samuel. I hope you like the conference. Thank you. We got another one of our speakers here at 4C, and would like to ask him some questions. Hi, please introduce yourself.
Hey, my name is Eric, and I'm the CEO of the Do Dreams game studio based in Helsinki, Finland.
Very nice to meet you, Eric. Tell me, what's the very first video game you've ever played?
I guess when I was a little kid, my dad was in banking, and he had a lot of business trips, and he went to Japan, and he brought me one of these Nintendo handheld, like small games. It probably was Donkey Kong. So that's my first memories with gaming, and then I played a lot of Oil Panic with the Disney characters, so fond memories with those. Favorite gaming memories, well, I like games that I can play with my friends. I remember when I was in high school, we'd go visit my friend's house and we played a lot of these like sports games together, like NHL 95 and some F1 racing games. So I would say that maybe NHL 95 is the game that I have played most with my friends, and I have fond memories of starting after school and then realizing this like 2 a.m. and knowing that my mother will be very angry when I come home late.
That happened to all of us, I think. How did you start in the video game industry? What led you here?
I was earlier a marketing lecturer at this business school in Helsinki. And then at some point I realized that instead of talking about business, that I'd like to do business myself. I had my own startup for 3 years, did different kinds of entertainment apps. I was interested in storytelling in apps and online and social media. After that, I did that for 3 years, failed miserably. But I guess the one thing I learned was how to test concepts early with real customer data, because when you have little money, you need to be sure that you're spending it wisely. And I had the opportunity to join an existing team, so I joined Do Dreams as a CEO, and together with the wonderful team I have there, we started with these mini games. Eventually, came up with Drive Ahead, which is our current franchise that we're developing.
Sounds great. Tell me what.
Like this? Okay. Yeah.
Just a bit in the camera.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So what's your favorite thing about the video gaming industry, or maybe just something you strongly like about it?
I think my favorite thing about the gaming industry is the community of developers. So traveling around the world, meeting wonderful people who make games, and talking to people and learning from them. I think it's really cool how in gaming people are very open to share their experiences about the business aspect of running a game studio, management stuff, tips and advice on scaling and growing a company. It has been very useful for me, and hopefully by giving talks at events like this, maybe I can give something back to the community.
Oh, you definitely are. Anything that maybe irritates you or something you don't like about the industry, strongly dislike?
Well, I think in recent years, games are developed with data and analytics, and that's of course very important. And I think all the creative decisions should be based on data. But what I've noticed is that studios maybe give up quite easily on games and their communities. So we have found that if we really invest in the community and take care of the players by making regular updates to the game, thinking of the game not as a product but as a service, then the community will support you through difficult times.
What trends do you think are going to persist or maybe appear anew in like a 10 years time? Let's make a prediction.
Oh, that's a very tricky question. So with everything developing so fast, I guess it's really difficult to say. I'm very excited about AR. So our studio, we launched our first augmented reality game, Drive Ahead Mini Golf, just yesterday. So I'm very interested in seeing how this market will develop in the next year or two. If you look at 10-year perspective, then maybe games will be everywhere. Maybe like your glasses could be a platform for playing games.
I'd love that.
Yeah. So maybe it will be very interesting to see what kind of sessioning games will have when people could basically be playing all the time.
What do you think is more important in a game, like one of its aspects, the ever discussed questions, the graphics, the gameplay, the game design, the storytelling maybe?
We usually start with a fun core gameplay. So of course we want to make fun, cool games, but we found that that's not enough. So you need to make sure that your players have a reason to return to the game often, and they want to return with their friends. So I think planning this progression and making sure that there are some kind of events like live operations, I think that's very important. And though everybody knows monetization is important, like just thinking of the path the player takes in the game and when are they presented with opportunities to spend money or watch videos or do something like that, like connecting the revenue model with making the game experience better. I think that's very crucial.
Do you have a vision of a video game you'd like to create if you weren't restricted in absolutely no way, like financially, creatively?
There's only one right answer to this, and that is that if we would have no financial restrictions, we would be doing the exact same thing that we're doing now. So I believe that the format that we have, developing games with minimum risk and investment, testing concepts early with players, and launching games thanks to this wonderful, large and active community that we have with Drive Ahead, is the way that we would want to do it, regardless of what kind of budget we have.
Sounds fair. Let's come back to the real world for a moment. What do you think about St. Petersburg?
St. Petersburg is a wonderful place. We've been blessed by wonderful weather this time. I heard from the locals that we're very lucky to enjoy this nice weather. I've had the opportunity to visit St. Petersburg 3 times during the last year for a couple of events, and I'm always excited to meet the local developers. Our Drive Ahead game on Android, Russia is the largest market for us, and this is something that we want to understand better, like why people like the game here, and see how we as a studio could be more present in Russia and be closer to our fans, the players, on Russian social media. So that's why I'm always interested to visit Russia and meet people if I have the chance.
Well, now you have the chance, another one, at this event 4C, and what do you think about it?
I've had a chance to talk at many international events in China and the US, GDC, and places in Europe. I think 4C is the best organized event I've ever been to. You guys are taking really good care of the guests, and the lineup is awesome. So I'm giving a talk myself, but the rest of the time I have a full schedule of listening to presentations. So usually when I go to these international conferences, I'm quite tied up with meeting partners, but here I'm really going to enjoy going to the talks myself and hearing what the experiences people share.
And if you were interviewing yourself right now, what question would you like to ask yourself?
What question would I like to ask myself? I'd probably ask that, why do I have this wonderful beard?
Why do you?
Well, I'll tell you guys a secret. So I'm actually the great-grandson of Santa Claus. And that's why I have this beard, and Santa Claus said to me that you have to learn how to bring people of the world joy. So that's why for the next about 200 years I'm going to be the CEO of the Do Dreams game studio. And one day, in about 200 years, when my beard is all white, then I will become the next Santa Claus.
Really looking forward to it, and from the presents from you. What are you looking forward to? What's maybe the speech that you'd like to hear most? Anything specific?
I love all these demos and case studies that people do. I really like the talks where people go through some project and go through their experiences. So I have several of those in my schedule.
Great, sounds exciting. And now children all over the world are excited for a new Santa. And I hope you have a good time here. Thank you.
Thank you.